The Denver Broncos pass rush rotation is already set, but we'll tell you how Q Robinson can have an impact as a rookie for the Broncos this upcoming season on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day for all your Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more. This is the place to be. A special shout out there to all the everydayers in Broncos Country. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, become one. It's really easy. All you have to do is hit that subscribe or that follow button wherever you get your podcast, and you'll never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. As always, I'm your host, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports.
And I'm Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com.
And here's what you can expect on today's lineup for Locked On Broncos. We're going to go through Q Robinson, one of the Broncos' Day 3 additions in the 2025 NFL draft, going through his impact, why the Broncos added him to the special teams equation, where he fits in the pass rush rotation that's already set right now with Nik Bonitto and Jonathan Cooper and a couple of other guys right behind them. But we'll also dive deep into how he can get onto the field here in 2025. And we're also going to talk about, is his experience and his injury history a little bit of a concern here? You get all that and much more on Locked On Broncos. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Sayre, Q Robinson, look, I think the meat and potatoes portion of the Broncos 2025 NFL draft class really comes from the guy we talked about yesterday in Savion Jones at LSU. And I think it continues on here with Q Robinson, an edge rusher, outside linebacker out of Alabama. The Broncos adding depth to that position, but primarily you have to ask yourselves, was this a reason that the Broncos add him to the mix so he could play on defense? Or is this a special teams move for now with the possibility of maybe moving up in a few years?
I think he's going to play some defense right away, Cody. I really do. And maybe that's just my optimistic outlook at this point in time. Of course, there's no reason not to be optimistic about these rookies. But you look at last year's snap counts off the edge for the Denver Broncos, 820 snaps for Jonathan Cooper, which was 71%, 708 snaps for Nik Bonitto, which was 61.3%, and Jonah Elliss, surprisingly, Cody, he got 434 snaps, almost 38% there for the Denver Broncos. And then Dondrea Tillman played 242 snaps at 21%. Baron Browning still accounted for 146 snaps. And then obviously late in the season, we saw Drew Sanders get out there for a handful of snaps. So the Broncos rotated guys a lot. And I think when you even look at those numbers there for guys like Cooper and Bonitto, they played a little bit more than the typical full-time guys. I mean, over 70%, right? So we're talking about guys that they're not rotating a ton, and yet the Broncos are still getting everybody on the field for a significant amount of snaps. So I feel like there's a lot to go around, and because of that, I wouldn't be shocked to see Q Robinson really have a big role in this unit in 2025.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. I just have a hard time seeing that right now with just how the pass rush rotation is already set, right? You mentioned it, Nik Bonitto, Jonathan Cooper, those are your two starters. Jonah Elliss played a lot last year, and they're going to expect to play him a little bit more because he's a third-round pick for Denver. Dondrea Tillman, I expect an increase in snaps here. The only way I can honestly see Q Robinson getting on the field defensively is if there is an injury at that position. And we understand there's been times where that position group has certainly been banged up. I mean, the Broncos, Baron Browning early on in the season last year had an injury week 2 against the Steelers, and that's how we ended up seeing Nik Bonitto get more of an opportunity to start, and then really he ran away with that role even when Baron Browning came back from his injury, and then Denver traded Browning away to the Arizona Cardinals, and he got an extension there over in Arizona. Happy for Baron. But, for a guy like Q Robinson, I could see him cutting his teeth a little bit more on special teams. Now, look, if Dondrea Tillman played 21 or 29% of the snaps last year, if those guys are healthy, unless Q Robinson comes in training camp in the preseason and beats Dondrea Tillman out, essentially, which, it's always a possibility, drafted versus undrafted. But Dondrea Tillman's story It's pretty exciting. We mentioned there the amount of pressures and the amount of sacks that he had despite the limited amount of snaps he played in totality over the course of 12 games throughout the season for him, I think is something that not sleep on here. I did see something interesting, though, on film here from Q Robinson that maybe gives credence to how the Broncos can maybe be a little creative with him at times, though. I think the offseason additions of Drake Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, I think it makes this a little bit challenging. But, when they were playing Mizzou this past season, he lined up as a stack linebacker. So, there was times where he's playing outside as an edge rusher, but then certain formations that come out by Mizzou, they'd have 3 down linemen and then 3 linebackers, and he kind of plays stacked up as when they had a sniffer in the backfield there for Mizzou. So part of me is wondering here, he's got the athleticism. He's 6'5", I believe around 220 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. He moves well. He's good at keeping edge contained. Could they maybe use him as a spy in certain situations? I mean, I think there's a possibility that they could, but then you also have to ask yourself, we talked about Jahdae Barron and how he can play. Like, Denver's got creativity with how they can maneuver and deploy guys. My honest opinion here, I'm curious for yours. I know you've shared that you think he's going to play right away as a rookie, can have a role. It's certainly a possibility, but is he more so in a position like Wesley Woodyard was in essentially before he became a household starter down the road? I mean, it took him playing special teams, being a special teams ace for a handful of years in Denver before he became a starter at linebacker and then a captain eventually there of Denver's defense. I'm curious for your thoughts on that.
I think the biggest difference to me with this guy, Q Robinson, and somebody like Wesley Woodyard is that Wesley had to work from being an undrafted free agent. He had to prove himself on special teams in order to crack that defensive rotation, where he played obviously really well for a number of years for both the Broncos and obviously the Tennessee Titans. This guy is a 4th-round pick, and that's not to say that, oh, well, he's going to just instantly get on the field. But I think because the Broncos are going to rely on him to play so much special teams early on, he's going to be on the active game day roster. And because of that, if you're dressed, hey, you might as well go out there, mess around, and make a few plays on defense too. It might be situational. It might be dependent on the opponent. It might be dependent upon the score at the time, right? Maybe in order for him to get out there defensively, the Broncos will have to be up by 2 scores, right? Because if you're trailing, or if you are trying to get back into a game, or if you're trying to hold on to a tight lead, you're not necessarily going to throw your 4th-round rookie out there on a key 3rd down when you have those aforementioned guys like Cooper, Bonitto, even Elliss, and maybe even Tillman. I think he could steal some snaps from Tillman, but at the same time, it could be a bit of a reset at this position, right? Not to say, well, you're going to open up competition at the top, but I think when you have a group of 5 guys that in May, you can say, hey, we're going to go into the season. These 5 guys, not only we know they're going to be on the roster, assuming they're all healthy, but they're all going to dress on game days, because Jonah Elliss and Dondrea Tillman finished top 7 last year on the team in special team snaps. These guys are going to dress and they are going to play. So because you're going to have all 5 of them out there already, my thought is like, throw the guy out there, like you said, as a QB spy. Let him be a pressure player from the stack linebacker position. Throw him out there off the edge on a 3rd and 15 when you're up by 10 points. I'm going to say this. I'll set the over-under for snaps this season for him, 99.5. I think it's fair for people to say, I think he's going to play less than 100 defensive snaps. I think I could see that. That's a very possible outcome. But I'm going to say, I'm going to hit the over on 99.5. I think he's going to play more than 100 snaps this season defensively for the Broncos.
Well, one thing I would say that Nick Saban even proclaimed about a guy like Q Robinson was he really was a special teams ace over there at Alabama. A little funny note, he's got 1 career punt return for 3 yards. Now, I think that was more so he wasn't lined up back as a punt returner, but somehow he ended up with the football and had a 3-yard return. So, hey, maybe a return dynamic is possible here for Q Robinson. And look, I also want to say too, like, even if let's say he plays under 99 snaps or doesn't play hardly any snaps at all, right? We've seen the Broncos, at least with Sean Payton. There's been times he's redshirted guys. J.L. Skinner is a great example of that. Even if that's the case, I think we have to set the expectation here for Broncos fans. They're like, well, why did they spend a draft pick on this guy if he didn't get on the field? Well, I think a lot of it is, what do we hear them talk about so much? Player development. That's going to be key. But look, I think the Broncos can very much go into the season with flexibility. He'll be on the 53-man roster, but I think one of the bigger things we'll take a look at here is he a game day inactive, or is he active? And if so, is he playing special team snap? so much of where we're going to find out a little bit more about Q Robinson. I think sometimes when you have obviously training camp, you're going to see some practices. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Broncos are going to have joint training camp practices with somebody this year, but it's not going to be in Denver, I believe. I believe they're going to be on the road. I don't know the dates or the times or who that is exactly. I think I heard something about that. But also, you're going to see it in the preseason. What can this guy do? And if this is a guy who on, game 1, game 2 of the preseason, let's say he's on kickoff or punt, he runs downfield and blasts somebody, it's going to be hard to ignore him getting some playing time, at least on special teams as a rookie this upcoming season. But Broncos Country, want to know your thoughts here on Q Robinson, maybe his projected fit with the Broncos, already having 4 pass rushers who played quite a bit in totality last season. Can he crack the lineup in your opinion? Make sure to let us know here on today's episode of the show. But we're not done yet, Broncos Country. Still got a lot to discuss here. We'll tell you exactly why some of the strengths that Q Robinson has could be a benefit for the Broncos defense if there is an injury and he does find himself into the rotation. We'll break that down and much more on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Skylight. Say goodbye to the sticky notes, the scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites, because the Skylight calendar, it's here, and it's going to bring clarity to the chaos and help your family stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars like Google Calendar, Apple, Outlook, and so much more, and makes it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place.
Well, I just got a Skylight calendar just this past week, and I tell you the thing I like about it, my fiance and I, we've got a wedding coming up, so we still have some final deadlines that we have to take care of before our big day in the month of June. And tell you what, Skylight makes it easy because you have those features built in, like, that this payment for this final thing is due on this day. Got to pick up your suit on this day for the wedding. You got to make sure this vendor has all the information on this day. Skylight takes the stress out of all of that for my fiance and I ahead of our big day.
Yeah, and you know me, Cody, I got kids, we got schedules, they got homeschool, they got chores to do, so it's very, very helpful for all of that. And right now, for all the listeners, Skylight is offering $30 off of their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's SKYLIGHTCAL.com/NFL. You're only as good as the guy you're one snap away from seeing out there on the field in today's NFL. And the Denver Broncos, they have a plethora of talent off the edge. Q Robinson is just the latest. Cody and I are going to tell you exactly what strengths he has in his game that make maybe Broncos coaching staff confident if they need to utilize him for an extensive period this coming season. But Broncos Country, before we talk any more about Q Robinson, I want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes us your first listen of the day every single day. If you haven't already done so, go ahead, take a couple seconds, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And especially if you haven't already done so on YouTube, go ahead and join the growing community over there as well. We appreciate you for doing that. Let's talk about the strengths for Q Robinson. This is a guy that George Paton was kind of gushing over after the Broncos selected him. The Broncos only had that one high pick on day 3 of the draft. And I say high, relatively speaking. I think he was picked like 134, something like that. And so it was kind of deep into the 4th round, but they stayed put. They took a guy that this wasn't a position that was really on anybody's radar, right? Going into the draft of saying, hey, in your mock draft, you better include an edge guy. The Broncos obviously felt strongly about Q Robinson. Cody, what did you see when watching him that probably made them lean this direction?
I mean, he's lengthy, as a stand-up pass rusher. He moves well laterally. I think he's a smart football player. And the one thing I saw when doing my film breakdowns on him when I'm watching him here is that he does a really good job of keeping contained, right? As an edge rusher, it's one of the more prominent responsibilities that you have is not getting too far upfield in your pass rush. I think he finds a happy medium between I'm rushing upfield, but I'm not giving up so much ground outside where I'm just staying base here. If a quarterback slides underneath, I can step down and make a play. He did that. He was working against, obviously, the Mizzou offensive tackle, Armand Membau, who went to the New York Jets. Obviously, the Broncos are going to play the Jets this upcoming season, but he's put together some really good work against some quality tackles that, we saw get drafted in the NFL draft. And obviously last season, his year was really cut short due to a really bad elbow injury that ended his year. He finished the season, though, in just 9 games, Sayre. 23 total tackles, 7 TFLs behind the line of scrimmage, and 4 sacks, 1 fumble recovery, and 1 forced fumble. This is a player, when you watch him, and I always want to preface this by saying, if you watch edge rushers, Sayre, sometimes the tape can be a little bit boring because they're seeing a lot of action go away from them. They're seeing a lot of dive action go there. But when a guy flashes on tape, you have to pay attention. He's athletic. He's rangy. He's got that length, as I mentioned there, at 6'5", and he's got a high motor. That's another thing that stands out. The Broncos love high motor guys. There's a lot to like here about Q Robinson and the player that I think he can become here in the NFL.
The one trait that keeps getting talked about with Q Robinson seems to be that he's twitchy, right? And you love that in your edge guys. Is what does that mean? That means that this guy's got that burst, the get off. He's got the ability to create that tight arc around the tackle to get to the quarterback as quickly as possible. You could dip the shoulder around there. You got the ability to utilize that length for speed to power and to be able to get your hands on offensive linemen to set the edge there. So the twitchy aspect of his game, Cody, I really like. And I think playing special teams a lot helps a guy like this and not just getting on the field, but in everything that you do, taking angles, reading the field, seeing how fast guys are at the NFL speed. I mean, that's going to help him get on the field, I think, early on. And I'm interested to find out what's the Broncos' plan for developing a guy like this, because last year they took Jonah Elliss, who was one of the youngest prospects in the draft. And now you take this guy who played less than 400 total snaps in terms of defense for Alabama, which is fascinating to me. So I can't wait to see how the Broncos deploy these strengths that he has in his game, how quickly he can adapt to NFL offensive lineman, because that's one of the other biggest keys is, okay, you got the twitch, you've got the athletic traits, you're showing that you have the bend around the edge. Can you do it against NFL offensive tackles? Do you have those secondary moves? And that's where he's probably going to need to be coached up the most, right? And where guys like Jamar Cain come into the mix, because you want to get this guy a developed plan as a pass rusher. And that's probably the number one thing that I think guys who they just win with athleticism at the college level, that's probably the number one thing they struggle with transitioning to the NFL.
Well, you mentioned it there. I'd say the obstacle that a lot of players face, and even experienced pass rushers at the NFL level, it's different than college. Sometimes at college, you're just better than the offensive tackle that you're going against, and you can blow by him with speed. Thing I like about Q, he's got a variety of speed rush to him. He has some power. I think he's got a pretty wide, I'd say, skill set of pass rush moves that are in his repertoire that he's going to continue to develop and expand on here. But the number one thing I say you probably have to watch out for at the NFL level is you have your initial rush, right? But let's say one of these offensive tackles, because look, the league, you have to have good offensive tackles in today's NFL with the state of quarterback play where it's at right now. You got to be able, once an offensive lineman gets latched onto you, it's can you keep your legs going, right? That was one thing that Baron Browning told me was a big adjustment from, his rookie season to his next season. He said, just people don't understand when you rush your first time and you get you're engaging with contact. What are you doing on your second rush move? You can't just have one move. You have to have a wide variety of them, because if somebody latches onto you, it's over. You have to be able to still move even when there's contact. That I think is going to be a fun transition to see it. When I watched him on his college tape here at Alabama, he's just a guy who's constantly moving. So that helps, right? Sometimes you see rushers get a little stationary. They'll rush upfield, they'll get engaged with, and then they'll just say, I was blocked. Q is a guy who, even if there's contact made on him, he's moving, he's clubbing, he's trying to fight his way because he doesn't want to get taken out of a play. That's what stands out to me about his game. And once again, I think you look at Jonah Elliss, there's a little bit of elusiveness there with Jonah, but primarily I think Jonah is a power rusher more so than he is a speed rusher, and he's very disciplined. Whereas Q, I think, has a combo of a little bit of power, but I think he's primarily a speed rusher that has, like I said, a wide variety of pass rush moves already.
And maybe that's where the Broncos feel like he brings a bit of variance to the group, right? Because Dondrea Tillman is another powerful guy. I think Jonathan Cooper is another really strong dude who can win with both speed and power. Nik Bonitto is really the only guy that's truly known for, hey, this is a speed rusher. Like he has one of the best get-offs out of any edge player in the NFL. I think it was even comparable or even slightly faster than Von Miller's coming out when he was coming out of Oklahoma at like a 1.51 10-yard split or something, just explosive. So this is a guy that you want to see utilize that explosiveness to your advantage because of those guys that will play next to him on the defensive line, right? If you are creating problems with your speed and your explosiveness off the snap, you open things up for the defensive linemen that playing next to you, right? Because those guys are going to get more favorable matchups. This guy's got to pay attention to you. He's got to set a deep pocket. That frees up Zach Allen or John Franklin Myers to go one-on-one against the guard and take their outside shoulder and cause havoc, right? So everything plays off of each other when it comes to the pass rush. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so much fun to include everyone in that group. And we saw that from the Broncos last year, right? Vance Joseph, that and the whole pass rush plan, it included everyone and they brought guys in waves. And that's how you maximize the skill set, I think, of the playmakers that you have in that unit.
I'm very curious to see how the Broncos envision Q playing maybe defense in year one. You know, if he does get snaps on the field, look, you're always one injury away from having your developmental plan accelerated a little bit further, right? We call it the trial by fire. I think Nik Bonitto, his rookie year, that was a great example. This is a guy who got thrown into the fire as a rookie, had to have that trial by fire moment, and he's grown from it. I mean, in 2 years after that, back-to-back really productive seasons, emerging as a young star rusher in the National Football League. You love to be able to see that. But we're going to continue our conversation here on Q Robinson on today's episode of the show. Are his injuries a little bit of a concern that he's had? Is this something that will follow him into the NFL? We'll debate and discuss that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. In the NBA playoffs, they're in full swing with round number 2 ongoing. And every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action.
Well, and as if the NBA playoffs being in full swing didn't make it easy enough, FanDuel makes it even easier to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans just have more ways than ever to play smart and win big.
The Denver Nuggets are facing off against the Oklahoma City Thunder on Wednesday night, and FanDuel right now has the Nuggets as 11-point underdogs against OKC, despite them being 1-0 in the series and having Nikola Jokic, who should be the MVP, by the way. FanDuel has that. So if you believe the Nuggets will go on the road in Game 2 as 11-point underdogs and win once again, FanDuel is the place to get in on the action.
And if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet, because if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA.
As we jump to the fourth quarter action of today's episode, Locked On Broncos, real quick, we want to say thank you once again to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And thank you for your commentary and your conversation in our NFL Draft Rookie Profile Series, highlighting each and every single one of the Broncos 2025 picks here in the draft. Your commentary means everything. You make the show exactly what it is. All right, Sayre, let's get into maybe some of the perceived weaknesses here of Q Robinson when we look at his scouting profile coming into the National Football League. The number one thing I think some people are going to talk about is he was just coming off of a season-ending injury last year at Alabama. He suffered a very bad elbow injury in the team's win against LSU, and that ended his season abruptly. But this is a guy who, despite that injury, he still found a way to get drafted. There's a lot of upside with what he brings to the table. Is there anything that concerns you about this injury that he's coming off of, or anything in general that you feel like might be a challenge for him in the National Football League?
I think injuries are always a concern when you talk about guys coming in, especially players who haven't played a ton, which I think is the other big knock against Q Robinson, right? As we mentioned, less than 400 snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, defensively. And where does that play against you in a lot of ways? Well, I think when it comes to play recognition, Cody, that's probably the biggest thing. Is you don't have time on task. You're not necessarily going to be great at play recognition, which, as we saw with other rookies in this, Denver Broncos system over the last handful of years, like that has caused a lot of guys to flounder early on, right? That doesn't mean they don't have the potential to. Let's talk about all these guys, right? Jonathan Cooper flashes as a rookie, but looked like he was, a fish out of water at times as well. Nik Bonitto, we had conversations about, is this guy even going to make the team in year 2 because his rookie season was that rough? And then obviously now after watching Jonah Elliss play last year, you have, some similar types of concerns. These guys are taking jumps after the second year, adjusting to the NFL speed. That's the one thing with, I think, a guy like Hugh Robinson is, okay, you love the twitch, you love the upside, you love the juice as a pass rusher. That can be effective in situations, but are you going to be able to recognize, different run option, things like that? Are you going to get sucked in? Are you going to get washed out of a play? Those sorts of things. That's where rookie pass rushers in general struggle, but especially maybe a guy that hasn't even played 400 total snaps.
Well, and the speed level is very different. Look, Q Robinson's a fast guy, as I mentioned. I think he moves well laterally, but, there is that adjustment period. And we see it all the time with edge rushers, rookie edge rushers. We've seen it with historically great edge rushers as well. When they come into the league, is that, there is an adjustment period, and I think a lot more now you're going to face bigger offensive linemen primarily than maybe you faced at the college level. I mean, for example, thank goodness the Broncos, this season, they're going to have their hands full in terms of who they face, but it's like you face a big offensive line like they ran into against Buffalo, right? That was a huge issue. What happened to Jonah Elliss in that game? Deion Dawkins, I think, pulls from the left side, tight down the line of scrimmage, and Jonah, who's doing a great job, he's squeezing it down hill line depth. He gets popped in the shoulder, has an injury, right? But there was a size differential that mattered there. You can overcome certain sizes with speed here, but there's an adjustment. There's a learning curve that's going to take place. And I'm curious to see how he does in practice against guys like Garrett Bowles, Mike McGlinchey. You're going to see these guys working there, and he's going to work a lot, against the second team offense, the third team offense. There's going to be a lot of reps to be had with these younger guys. And I would say that's the benefit of having a first-team defense and a couple of guys you already know who are solidified in your rotation that are going to rotate in with that first-team defense, because that means your second-team defense and your third-team defense in training camp in the preseason, there's more reps for these younger guys, these depth options who are going to be developmental players right now to get more of an opportunity to kind of get acclimated. The structure of the NFL is a lot different. But then again, I think a guy like Q coming out of a program like Alabama, granted this past year, it was not Nick Saban's show. Nick Saban obviously stepped away. Kalen DeBoer came over from Washington, but he has played for a coach like Nick Saban. And we know Sean Payton, he coaches hard like Nick Saban does a lot of times. So I think that's something he's going to be used to. He's going to be ready for. But what does the learning curve of going from the college game to the NFL look like for a guy like Q Robinson, who is not expected to see a lot of defensive snaps right away? That is the question mark. Does that hinder development, or is that something that you can learn or gain in practice or just the preseason in general?
Well, and I think to that point, the Broncos really have to be careful about what their plan is with this guy, because if you're any level of concerned about the number of snaps that he played at the college level, and he's not going to play as a rookie, that's tough because you want him to develop as a pass rusher. There's only so many reps and snaps to go around during practice. So I would expect that we're going to see a ton of this guy in the preseason, and I would expect that the Broncos are going to try to figure out what's that balance look like. Like I said, situationally, defensively, let him go out there and, just be licking his chops as a pass rusher when it's 3rd and 18, you're up by 10 points or 14 points or something like that. Hopefully there's a lot of situations like that this coming year for the Denver Broncos. But that's the other thing is, like Sean Payton has said, confidence is bred from demonstrated ability, right? And so if this guy didn't get a chance to play much at Alabama, are you doing him a disservice by not getting him some snaps? And I think that's the tension, right? Is you drafted a guy who didn't play a lot of snaps, you love the upside, but you also need to find ways to develop him outside of just throwing him to the wolves on a Sunday. That's going to be the tough aspect that the Broncos coaching staff and Jamar Cain and obviously defensive coordinator Vance Joseph, they have to have the right plan for this guy and see what can he handle, what packages can we include him in, because it's not just utilizing your speed, it's can you get off a block instead of avoiding blockers like you will on special teams. There's a lot of questions with a guy like this, but you love the juice off the edge, and that's what the Broncos hopefully are going to get to see as a rookie here.
Well, and the Broncos have a couple of guys in this year's rookie draft class that don't have a lot of snaps in totality. You talk about Q Robinson, Caleb Lohner, obviously the tight end that you got in round number 7. He's also another one of those players. So Is this more so the Broncos throwing darts and taking a chance on what they feel like could be high reward type of players, where in their idea, in their mind is, worst case scenario, you get high value special teams upside. We know how much Sean Payton values special teams. Even if, let's say, Q Robinson doesn't factor in on defense, let's say early on here in his career, if you're getting impact production on special teams, you're going to live with that. You're going to be okay with that because he's got the chance to maybe develop into that or get opportunities if there ever is an injury or if a guy moves on in free agency or if there's a trade. So much of that could influence the Broncos' decision-making in the next handful of years here. But I'm excited to see how Q is going to fit into everything here. We're going to get a first look at him this week here at Broncos rookie minicamp. I'll be at practice. I can't wait to share my thoughts and observations on what we're going to see, even though you're not going to be able to draw much in terms of conclusions from it. It's just our first look. It's instructional. It's educational. There's no competitive periods where it's offense versus defense. That's not and part of the phases of the offseason program just yet. But Broncos Country, we are excited about Q Robinson. We're also excited about tomorrow's episode of the show because Sayre and I, we're going to break down 2 of the final players in the Broncos rookie draft class. We're going to talk about the competition with Jeremy Crawshaw. It's Crawshaw, not Crenshaw. Crawshaw has the upper hand right now against Matt Hack, the veteran punter, as Denver prepares for training camp. Plus, Caleb Lohner, low risk, high reward potential at the tight end position for Sean Payton and the Broncos. We'll break down the Broncos' final 2 rookies in this year's NFL draft on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos. We'll see you then.